Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the knowledge series, and today's video we'll have a discussion on public distribution system, or in short PDS. First and foremost, I'm pretty sure all of you know that India houses one of the largest number of poor population in the world. If I want to give you certain facts, or let's say data, go by Tendulkar committee recommendation or report. As per Tendulkar committee report for 2011 and 12, around 22% of the population in India was below poverty line. And when you talk about World Bank reports, many of these particular World Bank reports also have quoted that India houses one of the largest population of extremely poor people. There is a report on hunger also, which quotes that India houses one of the largest people of hungry people or hungry population, which goes to bed without having, let's say, sufficient food grains or 2 square meals a day. So if you look at all of these particular data points, you will realize that one, there's a huge population which can be classified as poor in India, and second, there is an issue of food grain availability or food availability for this population. In order to address this, Government of India has been taking various measures in order to provide, let's say, the food grains or food availability to this population. Having said so, these initiatives are not new. Earlier also, even before the independence, mind you, the then government used to take certain initiatives in order to ensure that there is sufficient availability of food grains in the scarcity situation. That is, at the time of independence, there was an issue of scarcity in case of India, especially during the Second World War. And during this particular period of scarcity, government at that point of time introduced the concept of public distribution system, wherein the food grains were actually rationed to the population, were made available to the population. And after independence, government started with the first 5-year plan from 1951 to 56. The first 5-year plan, one of the very important objective was to ensure the addressing of poverty situation in India. And during that particular phase itself, again government introduced or reintroduced the concept of public distribution system. But to be very precise here, initially when this was introduced in India, it was basically universal in coverage. What do you mean by universal in coverage? Everybody in India was able to get access to, or everybody would get access to the food grains. There were no criteria. There was no distinction made between poor people, rich people, etc. So initially, to begin with, whenever this particular distribution system was started, it was actually covering, or it was universal in nature. And that was one of the biggest criticisms with respect to the distribution systems or PDS in India. That is, when they evaluated how much expenditure is the government incurring because of this particular distribution system or the reaching of the benefits, it was found that around 40 to 50% of the people who were covered under this were not poor, or else these were non-poor. Generally, in case of India, we have a criteria. Whenever you talk about, let's say, criteria, we divide the population into poor as well as non-poor, or else their technical terms used are below poverty line population and above poverty line population. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say here is, government has ensured through various schemes, even after the independence, the food grain availability to the population. But the criticism was that we are not targeting the population, we are simply giving the food grains to everybody or anybody who wants to get access to it. And that is the precise reason from 1997, government changed the system. They introduced the concept of targeted public distribution system, TPDS, targeted public distribution system, wherein based on the criteria, the population was actually divided into BPL, APL, and this particular population was actually utilized to give food grain access to these particular people. But regarding the public distribution system, right now, the most important initiative of the Government of India has to be National Food Security Act 2013, which I'll discuss in some time. But whenever you talk about public distribution system, what does it actually represent? The public distribution system is basically a system which has been put in place by the government, under which we are going to procure the food grains and ensure that these particular food grains are available to the beneficiaries, to the consumers in the market. Now, how this particular process is going to play out? You can divide the whole process into two parts. First part, where the food grains will be procured by the central government. The food grains are procured by the central government, and thereafter it is the state government which will ensure the distribution of these particular food grains to the beneficiaries. Although I am using the term food grains here, please remember this. There are many states which distribute many other commodities apart from food grain also. For example, many states distribute kerosene through the public distribution system itself. So the argument here is the whole public distribution system, which is nothing but a flow chart which is given here. It's a sequence which has been provided here, can be divided into two parts. And these particular two parts, first part is the duty of the central government and the second part is the duty of the state government. For example, the central government through the Food Corporation of India will announce MSP and procure the food grains. I'll repeat it again. The central government, when I say central government, specifically it is Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, CCEA. So the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs announces MSP and the Food Corporation of India will procure the food grains based on the MSP that has been announced. Now once they procure the food grains, they will store the food grains. Warehousing and storage is done by FCI. And once the warehousing is done, now the duty of the state governments will actually start. The state governments will have to take the food grains from the Food Corporation of India, and now they will have to identify the beneficiaries and distribute these particular food grains to various beneficiaries. For example, under National Food Security Act 2013, the targeted number of beneficiaries, 2/3 of total India's population. I'll repeat it. As per the National Food Security Act 2013, the targeted population in India is more than 2/3 of total India's population. So basically the identification of the beneficiaries has to be done by the state government. The food grains which are procured by the FCI will have to be received by the state governments. Now to the identified beneficiaries, it is the duty of the state governments to ensure that the food grains will reach to these beneficiaries through fair price shops, FPS, fair price shops. This is basically the flow chart, or let's say the supply chain system that is followed in terms of public distribution system maintenance in India. Now, what are the very important points regarding the most important scheme which is being used by the government to implement PDS? First, understand this, the coverage is important. As per NFSA 2013, the targeted coverage was 50% of urban population would be covered and 75% of rural population would also be covered. Now many of you will simply ask me, sir, why difference like this? Why should we cover 50 and 75% in two different areas like this? Why not equal? Reason for that is, one, the poverty numbers as well as the population is very high in case of rural India. And because this particular situation exists in rural India, we want to cover more and more population from rural India and ensure that food grains are made available to them. And moreover, please understand this. Under National Food Security Act, these are not simply the benefits which are given by the government. Government simply says this is the right of the beneficiaries. This is the entitlement of the beneficiaries. Government is not doing any favor. It is the right of these particular beneficiaries. Rather than having a welfare approach, now we are having an entitlement approach or rights approach here. So 50% of urban population would be covered. 75% of rural population would be covered. Now generally how this will happen? Let's take a very simple example here. Imagine you want to cover certain number of people in India. I'll simply call this number as X. Now it is the central government which will divide this particular X into different numbers, different allocations for states. Let's imagine there is one state which has been allocated a particular number Y people. So it is the state government which has to identify these particular beneficiaries and ensure that these beneficiaries will get access to the food grains under National Food Security Act. So rural population 75, urban 50, and overall we will cover 2/3 of total India's population. Now when I say 75%, 50%, 2/3 of total India's population, which year are we talking of? 2011, 2012. That is the population that we are actually looking at. Second, once the population is identified through PDS, public distribution system, what kind of entitlement are we going to provide? We are going to provide 5 kgs of food grains per person per month. Now I am saying 5 kgs of food grains per person per month. Some of the books, or let's say some of the reference material that you are going to use, rather than using 5 kgs, they will give the number 25 kgs. Nothing wrong, both are correct. The simple difference is, here I am talking about per person per month. Now when they say 25 kgs, they would be talking about per family or per household per month. Per family or per household per month. That is the entitlement. And within this also, the rice would be given or rice would be issued at 3 rupees per kg. The wheat would be issued at 2 rupees per kg, and coarse grains would be issued at 1 rupees per kg. Next very important point, generally the beneficiaries under NFSA are divided into 2 parts. Beneficiaries are divided into 2 parts. One, priority households, and the second one is Antyodaya households. Priority households and Antyodaya households. I am using the term Antyodaya households. You can also say Antyodaya card holders. What is the basic idea? In the year 2000, Government of India launched a scheme by the name of Antyodaya Anna Yojana. AAY. Antyodaya Anna Yojana. Under this particular Antyodaya Anna Yojana, poorest of the poor people or households would be identified, and guaranteed entitlement would be allocated, would be provided to these particular households. I'll repeat it. Under Antyodaya Anna Yojana, we identified poorest of the poor. Now some of you will simply say, sir, how can you identify poorest of the poor? The basic argument is, those households which do not have any kind of a guaranteed incomes would be identified. For example, a cobbler, a painter, an artisan, etc. Whenever the households have these kind of people, there is no guaranteed incomes there. So these are generally referred to as poorest of the poor households. And they were identified. Initially 1 crore beneficiaries were there. Later it has been increased to 2.5 crore. So argument here is, these beneficiaries would be provided with certain number of, or let's say certain entitlement. Initially the entitlement was 25 kgs per household. Now this has been increased to 35 kgs per household. So now the argument is, when you introduce the NFSA, you are going to identify, let's say 2/3 of total India's population. Obviously by default, Antyodaya card holders will also come into that population. Now will you give them double entitlement? Will you give them 25 kgs under NFSA, 35 kgs under the Antyodaya card holding scheme as such? Absolutely no. Government basically clarified that if you are an Antyodaya card holder, you don't have to be worried about your entitlement. You will continue to get the entitlement of 35 kgs, but now you will be covered under NFSA. You will get 35 kgs. You will not get additional 25. Whatever was your entitlement, you will get it, but you will not get additional entitlement. You will be covered under NFSA. Next, for issuance of the ration cards, for issuing the ration cards, government simply stated that the eldest woman of the household who is of the age of 18 plus years, I repeat, the eldest woman of the household who is above the age of 18 years would be identified, and the ration card would be issued in the name of the person. This is one more very important initiative, let's say provision. Next, if there is any grievance, if you have any issues with respect to the implementation of this particular scheme, the grievance redressal mechanism has been set up by the government. At the district level, there is an official who has been appointed, district grievance redressal officer, and at the state level, It is a state grievance redressal officer who will take care of these particular complaints or let's say grievances that the beneficiaries have against the implementation of the food grain system. Next very important point, it is the duty of the state governments to identify the eligible households. Central government will simply allocate what is the maximum number of households that have to be identified for a state. It is but the duty of the states to identify these individual households and say you would be covered under NFSA, you will get this kind of an entitlement. In addition to this, this particular act also proposes utilization of Aadhaar, information communication technology for better implementation of this particular scheme. In fact, we are already using these kinds of technologies. Where, sir? One nation, one ration card. This is the latest reform regarding the public distribution system. Please be very, very careful. Under ONORC, we are proposed or we have implemented. In fact, the central government day for yesterday itself has announced that in whole of India, we have implemented ONORC now. In the whole of India. All the states are under ONORC now. The logic is under the ONORC we have provided ration card portability. That is, you might be a beneficiary in any state in India. When you move from one state to another state, doesn't matter, you will be able to get access to your entitlement. Because the beneficiaries are identified by the respective states. When you move from one state to another state, there is a danger that you will be losing your entitlement. But with the implementation of ONORC, that issue has been addressed now. Now, what have been the advantages or let's say the merits of the public distribution system? One, it has basically helped the poor people in case of India to get access to certain entitlement in the form of food grains. You want to address poverty. One of the ways that you can address poverty is to ensure that sufficient food grains are available for the poor population. So that is what you are doing now under NFSA. In fact, in recent times, Government of India, in addition to the entitlement under NFSA, has also launched a scheme, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, under which free food grains have been distributed to identified beneficiaries. Second, the public distribution system will also help the government in stabilizing the food prices. How? Let me give a very simple example here. Whenever the food grains are produced and supplied, there is a danger that the supply could become higher and the market prices could crash. But now government simply says at MSP we are going to procure the food grains, so you don't have to be worried. So whatever are the market prices, they can be stabilized. If there is excess supply, government will be helping in procuring the food grains and stabilizing the prices there. Or farmers will take the food grains, sell it to FCI. Because please understand, we follow a process called as open-ended procurement. Open-ended procurement. OPC, OEP, open-ended procurement. What do you mean by open-ended procurement? Imagine Government of India has announced that they will procure this kind of a crop. I have cultivated it. I am meeting all the parameters. So I can simply take this particular crops, I can sell it to government. Government through FCI will keep on procuring these particular food grains. Provided I am selling the right quantity or let's say the right quality of food grains, I am meeting all the standards and I am selling within the time frame that has been prescribed by the government. So by announcing this kind of a procurement policy or let's say public distribution system, government has been successful or let's say has been able to stabilize the prices of these commodities in the market. Government also maintains huge amount of a buffer stock. Buffer stock simply refers to the stocks which have been procured for emergency purposes. Understand this? Buffer stocks essentially refer to what? The stocks or let's say the food grains which have been procured by the government to be used during the emergency situation. Right? What do you mean by that? Government will require food grains for distribution purposes. All of you will agree? Government runs. Example, the National Food Security Act, under which we have PDS, we have the ICDS, etc. So therein government requires lot of food grains for distribution. So government will procure food grains for that purpose. But along with this, government also holds a certain stocks which are called as buffer stocks. Buffer stocks are not used for immediate distribution. Government will procure them and store them. I repeat, government will simply procure them and store them. And this particular buffer stock can be utilized by the government in case there is any disruption of supply in the market of agriculture commodities. So it has also helped the government in maintaining the buffer stock. Next, states with low production will also get food grains. What do you mean by this? Imagine two states are there, state A and state B. In state A, production of let's say rice and wheat is very, very high. And in case of state B, production is very less or comparatively very lesser. Can I basically say that because of this, supply of the food grains in state A will be very high, state B will be very less. So that will have a huge impact on availability of food grains under PDS. That will have a huge impact on the market prices of these particular food grains. So what does the government do? FSA will procure food grains, more number of food grains from state A, will move them across the border and ensure that the food grains are sufficiently available in the second state. So states with low production will also be able to get access to food grains. And finally, the procurement is being done at MSP prices now, minimum support prices, which are guaranteed prices for the farmers. That is irrespective of the market prices. The farmer, whoever sells the food grains to the Food Corporation of India, will get the minimum price, that is the MSP. So thereby providing certain cushion to the farmers in the market. So these are certain advantages or benefits of the public distribution system. Having said so, is this particular system perfect? Are there no issues with this? Of course not. There will be certain issues. What are the issues? One, the procurement is mainly oriented towards the procurement of cereals in India. Have a look at this. In case of India's agriculture sector, major production is of rice and wheat, and the procurement majorly is done for rice and wheat. Only a small portion of the oil, the pulses are procured and coarse grains are procured. What about oil seeds? What about other commercial crops? Procurement is very, very less, and that too under the PDS generally the center doesn't procure them. But having said so, please understand this. Now the government has announced a new scheme called as a PM Asha scheme. Right, PM Asha scheme, under that various other types of crops are also being procured, but it has not been very, very successful so far. Second, what about the expenditure of the subsidy bill of the government? If government procures a lot of these particular food grains from the market, government has to pay money for it through FCI, and when the government pays money, which the procurement for which is done for distribution purposes as well as the buffer stock purposes, the government's subsidy bill or the food subsidy bill will be very, very high. The idea of food subsidy is very simple here. Government will procure the food grain, either store them or distribute them amongst the beneficiaries. But if they store them, they will not be able to get any money on this right now. And if they distribute them to the beneficiaries under various distribution programs, they will not be getting the price that they have actually paid. There are two technical terms here. Issue price. Issue price basically is the price at which the food grains are issued to the beneficiaries. Under NFSA, for example, these are issued at rice at 3 rupees per kg, wheat at 2 rupees per kg, and coarse grains at 1 rupee per kg. But the government, in order to make sure these food grains will reach the beneficiaries, the government would have incurred huge amount of expenditure in the form of economic cost of food grains. So the economic cost of food grains in case of India is much higher, very higher compared to the issue price, thereby ballooning the food subsidy bill, which is very, very high in case of India. So expenditure or subsidy bill is very high. In fact, there is one committee recommendation, Shanta Kumar committee recommendation, which recommends that rather than having a coverage of 67% of the population, that is 2/3 of the total population under NFSA, why don't we reduce the coverage to 40%? Having said so, please understand, they have recommended reduction in the coverage and increasing the entitlement. The number of, or let's say the quantity of food grains issued should be increased, number of people who are covered should be decreased. In fact, there is one more current affairs point here. Government of India has asked the state governments to look into the coverage of beneficiaries under NFSA as such. The coverage of beneficiaries is also a problem. Why? The population that has been taken as a base to identify and cover the beneficiaries under NFSA is 2011 population. But we are talking about 2022 population. right? So don't you think the revision has to be done? Of course, yes. There are a lot of beneficiaries who have not been identified because of various issues. Now the government has to have a look at it. Next, lack of storage facility and wastage of food grains. First and foremost, Food Corporation of India will procure food grains. We have already established that. But all the food grains that the FCI procures, it doesn't have scientific warehouse facility. What do you mean by scientific warehousing here? Whenever you procure food grains, you need to ensure that the food grains are stored at appropriate temperature, moisture, safe from the pest attack, safe from the daily changes in the weather as such. Now, whenever you don't do that, it is not called as a scientific storage facility. For example, if I purchase a bag of paddy, keep it in an open air, because of the weather, because of rainfall, because of changes in, let's say, moisture content, air, etc., don't you think the quality would be affected? Of course, yes. Even if the weather doesn't change, what about the pest attack? There will be loss of the food grains because of that. So FCI procures, but it doesn't have sufficient storage facility. Right now, what we are doing? We are using, that is, FCI is basically leasing the storage facility from the private sector enterprises, or let's say private sector warehousing facility as such. For that, again, money is paid. The cost of storage, warehousing increases, and wastage is also very high. Having said so, but in recent times, having said so, understand this. In recent times, the wastages of food grains have actually come down. And next, important point of budget borrowing. Now, very recently, in the recently concluded budget, off-budget borrowing done by FCI has been done away with by the government. But essentially, off-budget borrowing basically meant that FCI, in order to implement the provisions of NFSA, was actually borrowing from the market. And the money was paid out by the government along with the interest, increasing the expenditure or the overall expenditure that was paid out by the government in order to implement these particular schemes. Done? So these are the various points regarding the concept of public distribution system in India. Before I wind up, let me take up certain questions from your side. Isn't DBT better than PDS? Please understand, DBT is a type of a program. DBT is not going to replace PDS like this. And what is the meaning of DBT? Direct benefit transfer. Under the direct benefit transfer, we are going to target the beneficiaries and ensure that the benefits, either financial or the other way, other types of benefits, will reach the right beneficiaries. There are more than 200-300 schemes which have been covered under DBT. In fact, right, the distribution program has already been brought under the direct benefit transfer as such. How does PDS stabilize prices? PDS, right, understand this. The government will implement PDS, public distribution system, wherein they will procure the food grain, and the food grain procurement happens at MSP prices, and we follow an open-ended procurement. So if the market prices are very, very low, if you're a farmer, you can simply take the food grains. If you're meeting all the conditions of government, you can simply sell it to government so that the market supply will be stabilized, the market prices will also be stabilized. Who decides the prices of goods given, state government or central government? The central government under NFSA has announced issue prices. The state governments under different schemes, if they want to give it at a much lower price, they can give it, but the subsidy will not be borne on that by the central government. How effective has the public distribution system been in India in realizing its objective? We have covered a huge number of population. Please understand this. Imagine if there was no public distribution system, government would not distribute any food grains to anyone. You are on your own. Do you think the poverty numbers, right? I'll give you the data itself. 1990s, the poverty numbers in case of India, that is a BPL population, was more than 40%, somewhere around 45%. Tendulkar committee for 2011 says that it is 21.9%. 21.9%. Percentage BPL population. I'm simply talking about percentage BPL population. Percentage BPL population has come down. One of the reason is the households now do not have to be worried about complete availability of food grains. If you are a household who is identified, government guarantees that you will get this much entitlement, minimum this much entitlement. Right? So don't you think to a very great extent through the PDS system we are ensuring that the food grains are reaching the beneficiaries. Poor households are able to get the access to food grains because of that. Which government stores ration? I presume you are talking about, let's say, the food grains here. The warehousing is done by Food Corporation of India. The warehousing is actually done by Food Corporation of India. They'll simply transfer it to state governments. Now it is a duty of the state governments to distribute these particular food grains. So state government procure food grains from center at what price? Please understand this. The central government will simply distribute food grains. They will simply give the food grains as per the entitlement to the state government. Right? Imagine there's a state which has, I'll just take a very simple number, 100 beneficiaries under the NFSA. So 100 beneficiaries, 5 kgs, 100 into 5, 500 kgs. Center will simply allocate 500 kgs of food grains to the state government. It is the duty of the state government to actually distribute the food grains. Now you're talking about the payment. In case of payment, please understand under PDS there is a two types of system. One is called as centralized procurement and the second one is decentralized procurement. In case of decentralized procurement, rather than the central government procuring it, it will simply give the duty of procurement to the state governments. State government will procure, distribute the food grain. For having conducted all of these particular operations, central government will pay commission to the state governments. Done? So these are the various the aspects related to public distribution system and the merits as well as the demerits associated with that. Thank you. If you have not yet subscribed to Byjus Exam Prep IAS, kindly do subscribe. Any valuable comments, please write it below so that we will have a look at it and provide you better knowledge. Thank you. Have a great day.